Welcome to Legends in Leadership, brought to you by ISF and the Carrington Group. Legends in Leadership is an inspirational podcast featuring the stories of leaders who are making a difference. Our goal is to inspire you with the stories of leaders who come from humble beginnings, overcome challenges, and ultimately rise up to make a difference in people's lives.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to Legends in Leadership podcast. My name is Dr. Blair Ritchie. I'm the Executive Director of the International Student Foundation. I usually have a couple co-hosts with me, but Tyler Tallman and Jason Smith, who are family officers with the Carrington Group, are off doing family officer stuff, and will be back with me next week. But we're going to continue the pattern that we've kind of established on this fun little podcast, and we start out with a little leadership trivia question. So I'm going to throw it out there and let everybody ponder it, and I'll come back at the end to kind of fill in the answer for it. If you lived in the 19th century and you were a woman, you faced an uphill battle to get access to quality education, and that's especially true if you had any kind of love for the sciences. But this legendary leader overcame all of those obstacles to become one of the great scientists, great healers of the 20th century. Every time that you break a bone and need an x-ray, you can thank this Polish woman who inspired the world and was twice awarded a Nobel Peace Prize. Do you know who this legend in leadership was? I'll be back at the end of the program with the answer to that one. I am really jazzed today about our guest. With me today is Karen Pirro. Karen is an independent national sales director emeritus with Mary Kay Cosmetics. I love that title. Most people get retired. You get to be a member of the Maritime community, and that's awesome. But Karen has had a wonderful career with Mary Kay. Prior to that, she was an educator. And in 1975 joined Mary Kay, and didn't take her very long to get her directorship. Within 10 years, you were national sales, which is the highest field office. And Karen has the distinguished achievement of having a Mary Kay record for the most years in Mary Kay's inner circle, 24 years, and became part of the Maritime community a few years ago when she retired. So welcome.
Correct.
Thank you for joining us.
I'm so happy to be here. I was so looking forward to this.
Well, this will be fun.
Yeah.
We love just finding out how you got to be you, and so let's go back in your journey. Share a little bit about some of those formative influences that are still part of who you are today.
Well, that goes back a long time.
Okay.
I would say first and foremost is your family. I think that's always a big influencer, and I came from great parents who believed I could do anything, and were leaders in their community and involved, and I think that was my first indicator that you should give back to your community. And then went to Michigan State, graduated, and became a second grade teacher. And then at age 25, I really wasn't looking for anything, because back at that time, the only really female role models I knew were teachers or nurses. There were a couple lawyers, but that was basically it. So I didn't really even know what I was looking for, expecting, other than I thought it would be fun to find something exciting and have my own hours and do some traveling, but I didn't think anything like that existed. So I really wasn't looking for anything. But as it happened, I was invited to a Mary Kay skincare party. And the one that was leading the presentation asked me if I'd be interested in being a consultant. And I said, well, no, I have a full-time job, and my husband travels a lot, and I'm busy, and winter's coming. It was Iowa, and no, I'm not interested. But the gal was persistent, and boy, that's an important thing to be in your life, is persistent and have good follow-up. And she followed up on me and said she wanted her director to meet me, and could I stop for coffee? Well, the interesting thing about that was this gal I'm speaking of was Mary Hart, and she went on, she got a divorce and moved out to Hollywood and started the E.T. Entertainment Tonight TV program. Sweet. She was one of the founders of that. she later came back actually to do some voiceovers for some of the Mary Kay videos later on. But I just liked her. She had a great personality, and I connected with her, and so therefore I was open to listening to what she had to say. And when I heard the Mary Kay marketing program, I thought, wow, this is fantastic. I could be my own boss and have my own hours and do some traveling and build my organization as big as I wanted, as hard as I was willing to work. There was no ceiling, and so I actually went and showed it to my husband, who was a business graduate, and he said, this is fantastic. You'd be silly not to try. What have you got to lose, and how do you know unless you try if you could even do it? Because I'd never sold anything before. And so I decided to just give it a try part-time while I had my full-time job. And I fell in love really with the company, the principles of the company. Mary Kay, the founder, what a woman. Her philosophy was faith first, family second, career third, and treating other people the way you want to be treated. And just being able to become anything you wanted to be. Anything was possible if you were willing to work for it. So I loved all of those things and bought into the whole concept. And I just started doing what she said, which was selling the product and offering the opportunity to those who were interested, and started building and growing. And gosh, after that, we moved 2 or 3 times with my husband's position, but I didn't have to start over because there are no territories with Mary Kay. So it's been a lifelong love of being able to move and do what was right for our family, and yet not having to give up all the things that I'd worked hard for.
Well, you've enjoyed a lot of success in that and reaped the benefits of that. So way to go on that. Sometimes people will look at that and think that graph just goes up and straight on the right, but we all know life doesn't come that way, and there's the challenges along the way. So let's talk a little bit about in the journey that you have had with Mary Kay. What were some of the bigger challenges that you had to figure out and overcome?
I think, when I think about obstacles and challenges, one thing I've learned is that obstacles are only really important when you're taking your eye off the goal. And if you're just concentrating on where you're going, the obstacles become less important. But in my particular case, I think there are internal obstacles and external obstacles. My internal obstacles were, one, a lack of confidence because I'd never sold anything, and I had a big learning curve to go through. And secondly, I suffered since I was 20 from chronic migraine headaches, and so that has a tendency to take you back a few steps, especially before migraine medicines were invented. It was just basically laying in a dark room for 2 to 3 days till it passed. So that was a big interruption. And then I think the external was when I started in Mary Kay, nobody knew the company. It was only 13 years old. And so if I wore my Mary Kay pin, they thought it was my name. So I gave that up. So it was just building a reputation and just pretending I was the company, and that was sort of an external one. And then later on, a big obstacle was that we were a 2-career family where we both traveled, and our babies were both born after I started Mary Kay, 2 children. And so trying to juggle 2 high-performance careers and travel and be the best kind of parents that we wanted to be. So those were my biggest obstacles.
Those are significant. I love the story of Mary Kay in the sense of empowerment of women. And when you first started, and you talked about there weren't many role models, and then you fast forward that to today, and the changes. And it seems to me like there are people who politicize a lot of things with women and feminism. But underneath all that rarely does much good. There is indeed organizations and businesses that invest and make possible for women to move forward. And talk a little bit about what you've seen in terms of your journey with regards to the empowerment of women and the opportunities that women have had, and the influence Mary Kay's been on that.
Yes, there just weren't that many. And I remember thinking, do I really want to be a part of a company that's all women? I mean, I've been around women. I've seen the backstabbing and the talk in the teacher's lounge, and you don't want to walk down the hall. You're afraid they're going to talk behind your back. And so I really wasn't sure. But what I came to find out that is when we were all going in the same direction, and our advancement depended on other people becoming successful is a whole different story. And I came to find that women could do anything and that they're smart and talented. And in today's world, we see that in every organization. So many women have excelled and just added to organizations, become great leaders, and added a little more humanity maybe than was there. And I think it still remains that we all want the same things. Our families are important to us, and yet we really want to have some encouragement, and we want to have something of our own that makes us grow and feel better about ourselves.
Absolutely. And I like to explore what made people successful and what were some of the things that really were the keys to your journey that made you successful. And regardless if it's Mary Kay or whether, many of those are transferable. Many of those are the things that regardless of where our listeners might be in their business career or other kinds of ventures that there are, we're all trying, how do I be better at this? Or how do I be a success at this? What are some of those things that you found to be just absolutely essential to your story?
And everybody's story is different, as you say. To my story was I just had to become an avid learner. I had to read and study. It was different in the beginning because what I needed to read and study about were sales techniques, and I needed to learn thought patterns that would benefit me and not be to my detriment. In other words, positive thinking, positive expectancy, rising above your circumstances, learning how to have bounce back ability and not let the disappointments get to you.
So those aren't just phrases to you?
No, they're not just phrases. No. Yeah. I like to say that today people need some coping skills. They don't get bounce back ability very good. They just kind of bounce and splat on the floor rather than bouncing back up and continuing to go again. So I had to learn organizational skills. I'd never been in business before. I could manage a second grade class, but I never was a leader of many women or many people. So such a learning curve in first, how do I become a little successful businesswoman? And then how do I become a leader to other people and help empower them? So it was different at every stage along the way. But, Mary Kay said, if you're green, you're growing, and if you're ripe, you're rotten. And you need to continue to learn all throughout your life. And so that became, what's the next thing to learn? What's the next thing to improve on? Is it time management? Is it communication skills? Is it listening skills? What do I need to learn to be better for the next step?
It's interesting that you peel back every successful person and why they are. You almost always come back to that passion for learning, and you just don't stop it, do you? You don't stop learning. How do I get better at what I do?
No. In fact, after I retired, I said, here's a great motivational book. I need to read this. And I went, well, why do I need to read that? I'm retired.
Yeah, well, you're a
lifelong learner.
Lifelong is great. Well, let's talk a little bit about that, because you've invested a lot of that in training other people. And it seems to me that one of the ways you get successful is by helping other people get successful. And so when you look back over the years you've spent in training, even some international experiences, I know you've been to Moscow and some other international settings. Talk a little bit about what it is as a trainer that became really important to you and you found to be really helpful to others.
Well, I think there are different techniques to training. It depends on your audience and the size of your audience. Sometimes you're just speaking at them. My favorite kind is a smaller group where you can interact and find out what's on their mind and be more of a facilitator to helping them come up with solutions. And they feel much more important and smart if you're not the one giving all the answers. You mentioned Moscow. When I went to Moscow, it was several years ago, and I had to just start with basic of teaching them the importance of smiling and looking like you're enjoying something because they're so stoic. Mm-hmm. So I think that in training situations, you have to just figure out who your audience is and what it is that they need to hear. Is that your question?
Yeah, kind of. Yes, it is. And when you think about what's been the most helpful to the people that you've trained in terms of instilling in them, talk about
right things like don't trade places with someone. Don't take advice from someone you wouldn't trade places with. Things like that.
Yeah.
Take advice because advice and critics are everywhere, and if you listen to them, you'll be wherever they are. So be careful who you listen to. Be careful who you hang around with. Learn to believe in yourself. Step out of your comfort zone and dare to do something, because that comfort zone expands every time that you move out of it. I think having an attitude of gratitude is important, that everybody learns, and finding the good in every situation. And you know, some of these things are thought skills, and
Yes.
they're not necessarily how to sell or how to book an appointment, because we do teach those. But what I always try to do with people is teach them not only the basics of the business, but the basics of the thought patterns and what will help them to put those to the best use and become the most successful. Those are a few.
Yeah, and it is a way of thinking, isn't it? If you think a certain way, you're more likely, to act a certain way. And changing behaviors over here requires a whole different paradigm, doesn't it?
Right.
Changing
Right.
people to do
And
that.
some people have really bad thought patterns from their childhood or from something someone said to them along the way, and they have to reprogram their mind to say, was that true, or is that something someone just spoke and became my truth, and it isn't really true.
Let's talk a little bit about your time with Mary Kay. Obviously, being in the inner circle, that you've traveled with her, and what talk about her influence on your life.
Well, in fact, my husband and I were talking. He was a big influence on. She was a big influence on his life as well, because he attended we had an annual seminar in Dallas. It's pretty well known around here, and it was to motivate, educate the sales force, and keep them up and to date on whatever big things were coming out or the products. And so he went to all of those with me, and Mary Kay talked to the audience, but you thought she was speaking just to you, because she just talked about becoming better and doing good, and that the happiest people are the ones that are giving of themselves, and that how do you know if you can't do something unless you try? And that, you know what, those kinds of things spoke to all people, whether it was the cameraman in the audience, or whether it was my husband, or whether it was a new person who just didn't even dare dream because she'd had no success in her life. So Mary Kay was one who planted desires and dreams in people, and she was kind of like steel and velvet. She was like a loving sort of mother. You can do anything. I believe in you. And then when you did achieve, she was very quick to tell you what the next achievement was going to be that you were going to have. So she didn't really let us rest on our laurels ever. So she was tough, but she was so compassionate. And I learned from her how to inspire people, how to be a leader, how to care about people. She not only talked about it, but she emulated it in her own life. So, I mean, the stories could go on, because, yes, I did get to sit in meetings with her and travel with her, and she had the best sense of humor. She was just a firecracker in the humor department and could really relate with anyone.
So sounds like a very contagious personality that influenced all that. That's great. You mentioned a little bit about when you started out, you were a young wife and mom, and
not even a mom yet.
Yeah, okay, not even a mom yet, and then kids come along, and I'm sure all of us struggle with that balance of how do I go after my dreams and my career, and how do I have this marriage over here, make it work? How do I have these kids on? And how did you do all that? I mean, that's any tips you can give our audience today about that goal for balancing all those things?
Balance, yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
And it's something we all strive for all the time. But I think that if you can have harmony in your house, sometimes the balance. I mean, sometimes I worked more than I was with my family, and then there were a lot of times I was with my family more. So if it balances out in the long run, I think that you have it. You also have to be wherever you are, be there. If you're with your family, be with your family. If you're with your career, be with your career. And children like to know schedules and what's happening when. And so if you give them some sort of semblance of order, they thrive in that. Probably the biggest thing that helped Steve and I, because he became president of a company, and he was traveling a lot. He was traveling overseas, not only just in the United States. So there was a big juggling act there, but we felt like it was kind of important that almost all the time one of us at least be present with the family. So we would, at the beginning of every month, do calendar matching. And so my schedule was easier to manage than his. So we saw what his schedule was, and then I planned my trips and my work schedule around that so that we could juggle the children. And then, of course, we did have help. You got to have help in order to make it all work. We didn't have the luxury of having family live near us, so it was finding help, which was an ongoing thing that changed a lot. But you roll with it and make it happen.
And I guess you find that people do want to help you, and you're able to find a community to
and I think women sometimes think they can do it all and be all, and that's one of the things that we talk about is delegating. And actually that came from Mary Kay herself. She taught us to pay for the people to do the things that weren't important and spend your time on things that got you where you wanted to go.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing some of those reflections. We do ask all of our guests to add to our leadership library by just sharing a little bit about the books you've read, and out of those books, maybe the most influential and the nuggets that you're still grateful you read that and got that internalized. So
I can say more than one?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. The reason I say that is when I was just starting out, the books I needed and to read were different than what I ended up reading later. So I would say probably Norman Vincent Peale's The Power of Positive Thinking originally, and How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling by Frank Bettger was really important because it taught everything from time management to follow-up to just how to be a salesperson without being a pushy salesperson. I loved that. And then as the time went on, I needed to learn more about leadership and communication skills. And I think Dr. John Maxwell, all of his books were the most important thing. And I even listened to his tapes, now we don't have tapes anymore.
We have podcasts.
Podcasts twice. I subscribed to that and had 2 a month that came to me. And I just love his leadership style, his integrity, and his teachings.
And I'll share that with you. John is a friend and has been a big influencer in my own journey as well. And we don't get anywhere alone, do we? We just don't. And it's the people who've influenced us. And I love it, the fact that you're now influencing others. I'll just share this about Karen. ISF comes alongside of foster care kids as they're aging out of foster care and pursuing this dream of a college education. And one of the things that we provide with for our students is mentoring. And Karen is one of our mentors and has a wonderful student in Florida, right?
Yes, I do. Isabella Santos.
Yeah, what a great opportunity. Anything you want to say about the joy of even the bigger picture of just investing in other people's lives?
I guess, to whom those much is given, much is expected. And we can always give back at some level, no matter where we are in our life. And Isabella's just a joy, a college student who her parents just are in Brazil somewhere that just left her in the United States. And so for her to just have somebody to be a sounding board and a mentor and a friend, she appreciates it. And I just love her energy and her maturity in spite of the difficult hand she's been dealt. And so it's been great. I've loved it.
Cool. Well, thank you for doing that. And thank you for being our guest today on Legends in Leadership. I'll circle back to our little trivia question. We asked, I guess some of our themes have been about women who've made a difference in the world. And back in the 20th century, if you today have ever had an X-ray, then you can thank Marie Curie and her influence and the leadership that we still benefit by. And thank God for all of the women who really cut through some barriers to really make a difference in the world today. We're all blessed by that. Well, we've come to an end of another podcast, and we're just grateful for everyone listening. And as we close today, I just want to remind you of the words of John Quincy Adams, who once wrote, sometimes we wonder if we're a leader or not. And here's what John Quincy Adams wrote. He said, "If your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, then you are a leader."
Legends in Leadership is brought to you by ISF and Carrington Group. ISF is committed to leadership development for aged-out foster care and orphan youth. ISF's mission is to transform these youth into tomorrow's leaders with scholarships, mentoring, and leadership training. Google International Student Foundation to learn more. Carrington Group is a family office with a passion for helping business leaders and their families make smart choices and fulfill their highest aspirations. Google Carrington Group Dallas, Texas to learn more.
Securities offered through Regulus Advisors, LLC. Member FINRA/SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Regal Investment Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Regulus Advisors and Regal Investment Advisors are affiliated entities. Carrington Group and this broadcast are independent of Regulus Advisors and Regal Investment Advisors.